Welcome back to another episode of Be Real Talks. I'm Sophia Givry. Today we have Dr. Kelli Smith joining us. Kelli has over 27 years experience in higher education, mostly within the area of career services. She was promoted to Assistant Vice President of Student Success after serving as the Director of University Career Services for 3 years at Binghamton University. After the center grew significantly and received 7 awards, including the 2017 National Career Development Association's Exemplary Career Center, she now provides overall vision and leadership for the Center for Civic Engagement, Fleischman Center for Career and Professional Development, the Student Affairs Assessment and Solutions for Engagement Office, and the new department she has created, Student Transition and Success. As a first-generation college student and Pell Grant recipient, she also has a passion for supporting students from disadvantaged backgrounds and helped launch the Be First Mentoring Initiative and serves as a mentor herself. She is also a published author and an adjunct faculty member within Binghamton University's School of Management and teaches leadership courses to both undergraduate and graduate students. Today, we're going to be talking about Kelli's experience as a woman in leadership. Thank you so much for joining us, Kelli.
Oh, well, thank you. I'm so honored to be a part of this. And thank you for the series. This is fantastic. I really enjoyed watching several of your interviews. It's terrific.
Thanks. So we can get to know you a little bit better. Can you talk to me about how your personal experience or any aspect of your identity has influenced your career path?
I really appreciate that question, Sophia. You know, I think it's first important for this entire interview for me to acknowledge that while, you know, I didn't grow up in a terribly privileged background, at the same time, I'm very aware that I'm coming at this today and all the questions that you have from, you know, really a white woman perspective identity. So I just want to own that privilege before we talk too much, and that I can't speak for all women. I know that's a big topic today, but at the same time, in terms of my background, you know, I grew up in a small Nebraska conservative town, really, but ever since middle school had a real strong interest in social justice matters, even though that's not the language we used at the time, as well as even gender. You know, I remember in middle school asking my pastor why it is that I wouldn't be able to be a pastor, and which is still the case in the church that I grew up in. And I grew up with a single mother too, who never attended college. I remember saying in high school that for her, there really were only a few career options that women in her world ever considered, and that was teacher, secretary, and if you're really, really adventurous, maybe flight attendant, and you could go to flight attendant school. You know, and she ended up serving as a secretary her entire life and was a very hard worker, but didn't have the options that I feel like I did. And I feel really grateful that I was able to go to college, which for me opened up tremendous opportunities in a completely different world. I have faculty that I still stay in touch with today that, you know, I remember hearing that they were volunteering with the Nature Conservancy or in the prisons and tutoring prisoners with English and helping me understand issues like the death penalty better. So, you know, that was an experience for me that was life-changing, and it was also one where I found that as a woman, as a female, having some level of intelligence, but also really more so love of learning was valued. And I hadn't really experienced that before. But it also was a tremendous experience for me in terms of, you know, influencing my career path around just supporting women, issues around women and gender. I was one of the first to graduate, first class to graduate with the option for a women's studies minor. And that interest really continued on. You know, I worked since I was 12 and have had a strong work ethic and love of learning. So combined with that, I have 3 degrees in 3 different areas, one of which is leadership. and a real emphasis on studying gender and leadership. But college also, and my identity, I think, really helped me figure out, that looking at a field like student affairs, which I didn't even know was something that existed. I never had thought you could even work at a college because that's not something I was around or exposed to. But I knew I could really fuse my interest in, being in that college environment, which we know is life-changing for so many students, but also my passion for social justice and other issues. And I knew it was a field that I could do a little bit of everything over time, and I have loved it and haven't ever questioned my career choice.
Nice. And I think you really lay out your experience and just the intersection of different aspects of your identity, from, geography to being a woman to being white, how that really kind of shaped where you are today. And kind of thinking about, what does leadership mean to you in the context of your job?
Yeah, so, leadership for everybody is something that is personal. I do think there are certainly some definitions that many people agree upon, and having studied it and studied the research around it, combined with just, my own experiences over time, I would have to say, a big portion for me in terms of what leadership means to me is around uniting people around, a shared vision, having an environment where there's this culture of maybe unconditional trust, I would say, empowering people to really fulfill and live out the vision that is shared, and helping motivate people to excel, setting the environment up where they can excel to be their best, while having fun, balancing things, keeping things in perspective. I would say leading by example is an important part of leadership for me too. So that's something that's important and always is at the top of mind. And I think another thing that's important to me in terms of my own perception of what leadership is ensuring that people that are high performers have done great work, that is acknowledged, that the spotlight for successes is shared. I think, having been through experiences, I'm sure we've all been through these, where you've worked really hard or come up with a great idea, and then your supervisor tries to sort of take the credit for that. I think that's something that has really taught me the importance of ensuring people are acknowledged and recognized for their great work, and really, again, just inspiring people, and at the same time getting to know them, helping to understand or trying to understand what's important to them, and serving them in a way that helps them be their very best.
Yeah, I think that really, really highlights how there are a lot of relationships, right? I think sometimes when we hear leadership, there's this image of like this sole person leading a team, but you really talk about it, how it is that relationships, and it's also rooted in sponsorship too, right? It's like building up your team so that the whole organization is successful. Can you kind of talk a little bit more about your particular leadership style and how you really found an approach that works for you?
Yeah, I mean, Sophia, one thing that you're talking about is the relationship aspect of leadership. And that's actually really, and I'll talk about that a little bit later, because it really does also relate to gender in some ways. But that is something that I think has, hopefully people would say, I mean, in the end, what matters is what other people would say, but it is the strength and value of mine in building those relationships, but also just being really open, transparent, being transparent and honest, sharing information so that people can be successful, being collegial with others that you have to work with across, whether divisional or departmental lines. Also having the courage to challenge, either situations, structures, or sometimes even people, sometimes your own supervisor, and also staff if the situation warrants it. Obviously, you need to be able to have the decision-making skill of knowing when to choose to really challenge, but at the same time, having the courage to be able to do that is so important, and sometimes can command more respect because you are willing to challenge things that need to be. Also, trying to stimulate people's motivation to really think big and accomplish great things. I think people will say that I also can be a little bit competitive, and I am, in the sense that I want to make sure we are doing the best work we can for our Binghamton students so that they are successful. So I like to do things well, and I really work hard to inspire that among my team members and others, but also having authentic relationships. I think that being authentic, having that credibility is so important, because if you don't have that, as well as some integrity, it's going to be hard to inspire others. But having a great time while you're doing it. I will say, if I said one secret to success, though, is not so much around my style as it is making sure you identify your own strengths, but also areas that you aren't as strong in, and then hiring really great people. Hiring people is probably, and spending the time to do that, and getting trusted people that can do an amazing job, really sometimes regardless of your own leadership, is really important. And then really getting out of the way and letting them do the job, and advocating for them and recognizing them when the time warrants. But those are important. And if I had to, having a Ph.D. in leadership studies, if I had to kind of talk about a style that is more of an academic, researched style, I would say what I try to do is really, really emulate what is called transformational leadership. I think that many people have heard of this. Some people are familiar with it, some are not. It happened to be founded at our university, which I didn't even realize until I started the job, when I interviewed for the job here at Binghamton. So I'm particularly proud of it, because it's something that even before I came here and studying, that I had so much respect for, because it's really one theory that is linked to effectiveness more so than most others. And so there's something called the 4 I's. There's idealized influence, where you really are trying to create a diverse, open environment, be a role model that inspires others. Intellectual stimulation, inviting people to really launch new ideas and, challenge the norm. Inspirational motivation is another I. And it is really not being afraid to communicate high expectations, but also having kind of that charisma or ability to inspire people to achieve those high expectations. And then the last one, which I think is one of the more important and really speaks to what you were talking about with the relational aspect, is called individualized consideration. And so individualized consideration is a behavior. So these are all behaviors people can act upon, but it's really getting to know your team members individually, knowing what their needs are, and then acting as a mentor and coach and empowering them, setting up the environment for them, as I mentioned earlier, to be their best. And so this is really something that I would say, theory-wise is important, but also realizing that there are points in time that you need to help. Equity is not always best, so you also have to be honest and transparent with people that need constructive feedback. and having the courage to do that. You know, sometimes it's not the most fun part of the job, but when you don't do that, the people that are going above and beyond and are doing all these amazing things see those people that aren't. And if you kind of just let that slide, it really impacts the overall team motivation. So I think also having the courage to do that's important. But in the end, you know, having credibility and integrity and being authentic, apologizing if you screw up, and being humble are all things that are really important to me, at least when I think about what I at least hope my style is and what I hope others would say my style is.
Yeah, I think you really weaved well in, you know, your day-to-day lived experience, how that's shaped your leadership style, and then also that combination of your academic background and how you're able to really reflect and put those words to the exact actions that you're taking as a leader. So in thinking about your role as a female leader, you did discuss, you know, having that courage to say things to individuals that and perhaps, you know, may be uncomfortable, but you are providing that support for them to improve, or bringing attention to challenges in the workplace. Kind of on that vein, but a little bit disconnected, what has been the most significant barrier in your career?
I think that, you know, if we're keeping on the theme of, you know, being a woman, being a female leader, you know, I think it's interesting. When I was initially, you had sent the questions in advance, and when I was first thinking about this, I thought about how sometimes in courses I've talked about gender and leadership, and sometimes I'll have female students that will say, you know, there are no differences. I don't have additional challenges. And for me, with my lived experience and having had situations where illegal questions have been asked, such as, you know, how would your husband feel about these long hours that you're going to have to endure, or being on weekends, or what would your family think of you having to do a move? You know, the reality is there are still, most women, at least in my generation and others, I think would tell you they have all kinds of stories, or at least a few stories along those lines. But I would really have, you know, so there's that. I think we all deal with those things. Not that they're acceptable, but, you know, that is some of the reality. I wouldn't necessarily say, though, that that's by any means been the most significant barrier to success. I think when I think back to my earlier days as a younger professional, I would say something that comes to mind is a mentor of mine at my first professional job when I worked at Georgetown University. In my first evaluation, she said, you know, Kelly, when you talk, people really are listening to you. And I suggest that you speak up more. And I was so shocked by this feedback. And before it used to be, people will be surprised now, because I think most people know I'll speak up if something needs to be said. I definitely have that courage now, but early on, for sure, I think not having that confidence is something that was not helpful for me. And I think as a first generation college student, you, throughout your life, and I still deal with this, have this almost what many people call an imposter syndrome too, where you maybe just don't think you're quite good enough. Even though maybe to other people it would be something that they'll think, what? Why wouldn't you have that confidence? But I think lacking that confidence, and that's something that, you know, is a barrier for women in general. On average, research shows that women really tend to lack confidence much more so than men. And I think about having 3 young girls and how that really, you start to see that, especially in middle school. And it's that sort of thing that, whether it it stems from gender or this desire for perfection or a desire to please other people, not to rock the boat. You know, we need to be worried about harmony, and tendency to maybe overthink things. You know, that's probably, if I had to name something, I would say probably that, because it really, you know, lack of confidence affects our ability to be effective as leaders, and I think it affects our ability to be seen effective as leaders.
Yeah, and that really relates to me. You know, I was a first generation college student as well, and it's similar in the fact where, you know, that imposter syndrome creeps in and you don't speak up when you should, and then you're like overthinking after that happens about how you should have said something in that moment. But I also relate to what you said of how you kind of, once you unlock that courage, it's so much easier. And it's like, you're almost looking back, like, why was it so hard for me in those kinds of moments? So definitely a very relatable thing. And on the other side of, you know, so you talked about the barrier that you faced that was most significant. What has been the most significant help in your career as a female leader?
Yeah, I mean, this is a great question, and I think is something that I'm hoping for, you know, what I'll share will help others. But I would say, you know, really without a doubt, having relationships. So going back to relationships, having relationships with colleagues in the field, especially, or at least in the industry, that are ones where, you know, they're people that I know are the type of individual that build other people up, that advocate, and like you were saying, sponsor other people. You know, that is something that for me by far has been the most significant help, because it's not only that I know that I can trust them to go to bat for me. I can ensure that if I needed to know of opportunities that they would help me. You know, really my job right now, I was called by a recruiter because one of my colleagues tossed my name out, and here I am today at Binghamton University. But, you know, and I'm fortunate, I feel proud that I think I've hopefully earned that respect, but I also am very intentional about nurturing those relationships and returning the favor. You know, one of my most favorite parts of my job is ensuring that I help support others. You know, I think that I've taken that, but I've also really worked hard to make sure they know how grateful I am and everything, but also intentionally spending time to help sponsor and advocate and guide and mentor other people that I know are kind of rock stars, and especially women and professionals of color that I know face unique challenges at times. And so that's by far besides helping students and making sure our students are successful, that by far is one of the things I love to do the most. So watching people that I've helped and mentor excel and take on director roles, or, you know, get to the next step, or sometimes transition out of higher ed that's maybe a better fit for them. That is, again, one of the greatest joys. And I really do feel that one of the true measures of success in life is not what we often call that ROI, or return on investment, but more so ROR, so that return on relationships. It helps. And it also helps, you know, to be surrounded by people that you can go to when you have challenges, and that you can trust completely, but also gain inspiration from. That, again, by far, all of that has been the most important thing for me.
Yeah, I love that. Return on relationships. We need to start saying that more. So I really love the emphasis on networking. I think it's worth emphasizing that again to students, because I think that the idea of hard work and just having somewhat of a network established is the way to go. But really, it's having that intentional network, giving back, dynamic relationships, that level of sponsorship. And like Kelly said, there are jobs that I have gotten because of my network, right? People reaching out, oh, there's this position that you could be thinking about. So it's really important stuff and a great way to help women in the workplace. And we've kind of...
Can I tag on one thing with that? Sophia, you're talking about networking, and it's funny, I often will say this to students, that a lot of times students hear the word networking and they get this instant anxious feeling, and sometimes, especially if you're more of a person that has a little bit more of a introverted preference for your personality, it is important to, what I was talking about is building that network not only for yourself, but when you have that network that you've built, you also are able to help other people greatly. Most students that I talk with, if they ask, I'm thinking about a job, or students, I'm talking about student affairs professionals or others looking for higher ed jobs, they're looking at Tulane, or they're looking at Johns Hopkins or Cornell or University of Nebraska-Lincoln, or, I have connections now, not just nationally, but really internationally. And so I can tap into these people when people are starting to look for jobs. So not only do these individuals help me tremendously, but I can help others more. So helping students understand that networking is not always about self. It also means that you can help others more easily. And sometimes I think that takes the edge off a little bit of that type of what networking is. So
yeah, it creates like a fluid power dynamic instead of just like this one way kind of thinking.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And we've kind of talked about it a little bit in a little bit of an abstract way, but for those of you who are unfamiliar, there are a lot of stereotypes around women leaders, women in the workplace in general. If a woman exhibits characteristics that are typically associated with men, they can oftentimes be labeled as bossy, assertive, aggressive. On the other side of that, if they show that compassion and emphasis on relationships, sometimes they get boxed in as being too nurturing or nice. So in your experience, how do you really differentiate yourself from those common stereotypes, and how do you navigate them as a woman in leadership?
Yeah, to be honest, this is a difficult question for me in the sense that, from a research perspective, again, that there's something called implicit leadership styles. And so that's really what somebody's perception of what effective leadership is. And then there's all kinds of research on actual styles of leadership, what works for women, what works for men, how those, and around stereotypes, and how the stereotypes really feed into whether or not a person is effective. And you're spot on with what you're talking about, that, there's several studies that find that women that emulate what we might traditionally call more masculine leadership behaviors. So, maybe that they're more directive, or that they do have immense confidence, that there can be a negative effect on that, or on the evaluation of them. So, that's challenging, right? You get into this double bind that is particularly troublesome for women. There's really almost this feminine competency bind where, acting feminine is associated with incompetence, but acting competent is associated with masculinity. And, that leads pretty much only to the conclusion that it's unfeminine to be competent. So, it's challenging, because if you are a person that has worked hard to gain that confidence, if you're a person that, at times know that some people prefer more direction, so you have to give that direction, then even if that's not your preference, you have to be aware and recognize that you will potentially, and potentially very likely, be perceived in a way that's different than a man might be. And so what's tough for me about this question is that I can't do a whole lot about how team members, peers, my bosses, or others might perceive me because of their own implicit leadership style stereotypes, and those are really formed over time. Those are formed from when we're little, and images. And being a psych major, this is something I probably overanalyze. At the same time, I think it's important, it's important for us to be aware and informed of that. And, once in a while, you might have to have a conversation with somebody that you feel maybe isn't, kind of just asking that question. All right, so you think I'm being too aggressive. And if it's somebody you can trust with a kind of high level conversation, just doing a check-in. If I was a man, would you see that? I think that's the thing I'm struggling with, and just having that conversation. I don't know that that's always terribly effective. And it will depend on the situation, but that's one thing. But what we can do is when we are supporting and mentoring and supervising women that might be questioning things. I just had a situation last week where somebody I work with closely was really struggling with this guilt about something. And it had to do with a bump in, a raise and a promotion of sorts. And they felt guilty about it. And because it wasn't something they asked for or intended to get. But I said, do you think if you were a man that you would feel the same? Would you be questioning? Would you feel guilty? Because this person by far earned that bump. Exceptional staff member. So I think it's important to just do some check-ins and ask those questions. And we have to do the same, right? Sometimes if we get feedback that if you get feedback that, for instance, one time I got feedback that I was one of the most aggressive staff members that this person ever had, and which is not, I don't think what most people would describe me as, but coming from a male, it was something where I had to internally think about and do a check-in with myself. Would that person have said the same if I were a man? And I highly doubt it. Could I do a lot about that? Probably not, but it gave me some comfort and confidence to have that awareness, learn from it, know that that's what the perception is, and then kind of operate accordingly within the system that I knew I would have to. So I don't have a great answer, I'll be honest with you, for that, because again, I don't know. But, and also working to socialize our youth and at young ages. I think I might have mentioned that, I don't know. But that's another thing I think we can do. I've worked really hard as a mother of 3 girls. I would do the same if I was a mother of boys, to help them understand that there are these stereotypes out there, and you have to kind of work within that until someday we get to a little different point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was a great way of explaining how you manage it on all ends, like from the internal reflection to actually dealing with individuals in the workplace.
Yeah.
So what are some of your thoughts on what organizations can do if there is a desire to better support female leaders?
Great question. When thinking about that, I would say, there's several things out there in the leadership literature and articles, organizational behavioral articles and things. One thing that comes to mind is that one of my former institutions, we had the Chancellor's Commission on the Status of Women, and I was a part of that. And something that I thought was really helpful is we did do an organizational culture analysis, both surveying how people felt about their environment, how women felt about their environment, but also analyzing the general culture and policies and evidence of kind of both covert and overt gender bias, what some of the structures were that might disproportionately affect female workers and leaders. And that's something that I think is doable at most all organizations. And so really doing that scan of the campus environment and perceptions, that kind of thing. You can look at salary data. The commission really led to some helpful policy improvements around parental leave. We did not have at the time hardly any lactation support spaces for women, advocating really for similar breaks around schools and the university, but also just promotional policies and how those were put in place. There's also, of course, formal programs that organizations can do where they are supporting both female and male leaders and high potentials, but especially female, and creating things like mentoring programs. And it doesn't mean it has to be, in my opinion, I don't think it needs to be just women mentoring women. I think that can be helpful, but I do think that men can often serve as incredible role models, sponsors, and advocates for women. And sometimes too, it's providing training for all people of all genders about how to support women. So that's something that can be done. But I'd say, and training, one thing I really appreciated at one of my institutions is we had mandated search committee training for anyone that ever served on a search committee, not only around implicit bias for racial ethnic backgrounds, but also around gender. And that's something, those trainings have really stayed with me over time. And I think that's something that organizations could definitely do as well. But one thing that I also think is important is having both transparent salary data, which when you work for public institutions, that's there, but also the practice of not asking a person what their current salary is when they're interviewing for a job. We're fortunate in New York where as a state, it is a question that is supposed to be illegal to be asking. And there's a reason behind that, right? Women on average do not make the same salaries, and especially over time, if they've taken time off to rear children, that doesn't mean if you're hiring somebody for a job that if it's between a male or a female that you should pay them less just because they had a lower salary at one point. A job and the duties are a job that regardless you're going to have to do. And so, even if you're not in a state that is the case, you as an organization could choose to make that part of your policy and hiring so that it's a step at least in trying to equalize equal pay for equal work.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to unpack there, and it is able to help students in a multitude of ways, right? The first way of that really shapes some questions that students can be asking in interviews to identify what supports are available to them. It also helps students think about different initiatives that they could be starting in the workplace. And then it also shows just different kinds of trends taking place and how to address that gender wage gap and different kind of inequalities around women in the workplace.
Right.
So my last question for you is, what advice would you give to the next generation of female leaders?
So in terms of advice for, female leaders, students that are, getting ready to start their careers, I would say for me, some of the things that have been helpful over time that I've learned are having a commitment to always be learning. So even though my PhD is in leadership studies, I still am taking in information on how to better myself, learn about different styles, often research-based information being PhD, but I also take in what one of my faculty members described as airport leadership books. So those maybe aren't as research-based, but sometimes they might resonate. So as an example, a couple summers ago, I read John Gordon's The Energy Bus, and what stuck with me is this concept around, if people aren't going to get on the bus, and if they just suck you of energy, you might just have to kind of move on. He called them the energy vampires. And that's something that's stuck with me, right? Like, it's not probably research-based, but it's something that has helped me kind of establish also some of those of sorts. So just always be learning. Being open to feedback. Again, sometimes it's hard to hear feedback. Sometimes it might be gendered feedback. But being open to it and learning from it, it will help you. Feedback is a gift. And I think that's important to really keep in mind. Also, knowing the organizational structure within which, where you work or where you are. For example, people in higher ed, I feel like can't really. Sometimes, promotions are hard in our world, and sometimes the culture, it's not one I support, and I work really hard to support leaders from within. Sometimes you have to move out to move up, and just kind of knowing in higher ed, it's different than corporate America. It's different than the federal government where there's those structured steps. So you have to kind of know what you can do, if there are things you can do to kind of work towards advancing. So again, really just kind of knowing that organizational structure so that you can be successful. Learning to manage up is something that, I learned over time. I feel like until I read this one book, that was by John Cotter, and I used it for a class, I really realized, okay, I do an okay job supervising and leading, okay job with peers. I don't do as well managing up. And that's a skill that's really important. In the end, you're working, unless you're an entrepreneur and you own your own business, which is awesome if you can't do that, you are often working for somebody, right? And so you have to know what that person's style is, what's important to them, do your job, do it well, and earn that credibility. But also sometimes you have to make that person look good, right? And so knowing how to do that, how to work well with that person's important. But I would say too, I talked earlier about transformational leadership and the 4 I's. And that is a theory that really, when you look at the research, it really suggests that stereotypes associated with kind of transformational leadership might be less negatively biased against women leaders than those with other styles. And in part, maybe because it does have that relational base to it. And it's one of those things, again, where you can kind of overcome that role conflict of sorts that sometimes you have in a gender way. But also, big thing, seeking out mentors. I talked about this, finding a network. We're fortunate at this institution that our students have an amazing alumni network of people dedicated, at the ready, wanting to help people. But it might be also, it's a professor. It might be somebody that supervises you in your work study job. I still connect with the person that was my supervisor in my work study job in my career center as an undergrad, who has helped me my entire career of 28 years in higher ed. And seek those people out. They will help you not only in your career, but sometimes just your own mental well-being, checking in with them, and they can really help you just be a better human. and just work to try and inspire people every day, you know, give back what others have given to you, and look for those moments to inspire other people. It might be as simple as complimenting somebody at the grocery store, or a team member that did a really great job on a project, taking that time to appreciate them, thank them, inspire them. And that's something that I think we can all set for a goal really every single day. So those are just some quick things that come to mind.
Great. Yeah, all really sound solid advice. So thank you for taking the time to speak with us today, Kelli, and to talk about your journey as a woman in leadership.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
Yep, of course. And to all the students watching, I will see you on the next one.